happy Earth Week. I'm hoping that everybody is excited as I am for this webinar. Thank you for attending. I'm Frances Litman, the founder of Creatively United for the Planet nonprofit society, who with Grace Golightly, a journalist and co-founder of the Community Trees Matter Network in Victoria, BC, hosts this special webinar in the spirit and intention of reconciliation and in honor of all the land and water stewards, past, present, and future. We hope to cover a great deal of information in this session. First, we'll talk about fire prevention for BC's forests. Then we'll move on to FireSmart for homes, both urban and rural. We are grateful for the time, energy, knowledge, and expertise offered by this panel, which includes Herb Hammond, Rochelle Holt, and Dave Doust, who we will hear from during the first portion of this discussion, followed by Todd Carnahan. Herb Hammond is a forest ecologist, award-winning author, and retired professional forester with more than 45 years of experience in research, industry, teaching, and consulting. He is best known for his concept and application of nature-based directed stewardship. Working primarily with Indigenous nations and other rural communities, Herbs has developed more than 25 ecosystem-based conservation plans across Canada and in other parts of the world. He recently co-authored a book called Nature's First Cities, Restoring Relationships with Ecosystems and with Each Other from UBC Press, which focuses on applying nature-directed stewardship, ecosystem-based conservation planning to restore urban areas. Herb is also working on a book about nature and our place in our complex fabric. This book draws on Indigenous knowledge and ways with him that were shared by Indigenous people throughout the years. With assistance from Indigenous collaborators, Herb hopes to describe a new reality for settler cultures, a reality that is necessary for our survival and how to get there in face of the biodiversity and climate crises. Rochelle Holt is an independent ecologist and professional biologist who remains amazed that the global importance of ecosystems and forests in BC are not recognized by many of the management decisions occurring within BC's forests today. Rochelle has worked for the last 30 years for the provincial and First Nations governments, aiming to change how policy recognizes and maintains the values of BC. Rochelle has been vice chair of the Forest Practices Board, a member of the Minister's Technical Advisory Panel on Old Growth, and engaged in the successful Blueberry River First Nations court case relating to infringement of treaty rights. Dave Doust is a forester who is also a landscape analyst for more than 3 decades. He has worked with his ecologist partner, Dr. Karen Price, on regional and provincial land management and conservation, and developed and applied approaches for assessing the impacts of human activities, including the heating climate, on forest biodiversity, watershed health, and focal species, primarily with Indigenous nations and the provincial government. They have analyzed the influence of climate zone and forest vegetation on wildfire extent and severity, and have prepared wildfire ecosystem restoration plans. In 2021, they participated in the Old Growth Technical Advisory Panel that identified at-risk old growth suitable for harvest deferral in BC. And we also have Todd Carnahan, a public outreach specialist for emergency management Cowichan, with 35 years of experience promoting community values, including wildfire hazard mitigation, habitat conservation, wildfire conflict prevention, and land use planning. Todd's background in ecological land management is relevant to the application of FireSmart principles on private and public landscapes. He recognizes significant overlap in habitat conservation and FireSmart strategies that permit land managers to achieve multiple objectives. All right, well, welcome everyone. So I'm just have a little preamble just to set the stage here. And in recent years, we have all been shocked by the size and number of wildfires in BC, in Canada, and around the world, and the speed at which they grow and leave sheer devastation in their wake. Canada is warming at roughly twice the rate of the global average. This is increasing the conditions that create wildfires, longer periods of extreme heat, prolonged drought, and drier air, which also dries out vegetation. Also, there's more lightning. For every degree of global warming, lightning strikes are up to 30% more likely to occur. Lightning causes more than half of BC's wildfires. A recent study released in January says the trend is for fewer fires, but they are bigger. The size of the area burned each year in BC due to wildfires has doubled since the 1970s. And it is expected actually to double again by the end of this century. 3 of BC's worst fire years on record were within the past 5 years. In 2025, BC had well over 1,300 wildfires, and many were extinguished at a small size, but altogether they burned well over 886 hectares of land. This year, some parts of BC have an extremely low snowpack, which will likely make conditions drier. These include the Skagit region, which has about a quarter of its normal snowpack, and southern coastal BC and Vancouver Island have less than half. Now I'm going to turn this over to Grace, my co-host.
Thank you, Frances. We've been hearing quite a bit lately in the news and in advertising about how both the logging industry and the BC government believe that logging can help reduce wildfires. The Minister of Forests, Ravi Parmar, recently posted this on his Facebook page. He seems to be saying that commercial thinning and removing select timber from the land base will make our forests more resistant to wildfire and even more sustainable, and that we can kind of have it all. So I'd like to ask our panelists, in your opinion, can removing trees make fires more resistant to wildfire, as the minister seems to say?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. It is such an interesting thing, his post, and a lot of this, the conversation that is happening. The first word in his post was sometimes. And that is the critical part of this. British Columbia is one of the most diverse places on Earth from a forest perspective. So any generic statement about forests always needs to be qualified about where are you speaking about. We have basically desert-based forests, and we have rainforests, 2 types of rainforests here. We have very, very wet forests. And so across that massive range, there isn't a single answer. And so, in some of the driest forests, often which are currently not very healthy because they've been ingrown, in those particular situations, then sometimes the removal of the right trees has the potential to reduce fire risk. But in other situations, removing trees may well increase fire risk as you open the stand, dry out the soils, and create the ability of wind to move in the stand. You have a good chance in moist and wet forests of actually increasing your fire probability in the forest by engaging. So it really depends where and how, and I'm sure we'll get to those details as we go.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add to that?
I would just add to Rachel's where and emphasize the how, because the intensity of what you do and what trees you select, whether they're upper canopy trees, mid canopy trees, lower canopy trees, affects a lot of what the treatment results in. And my fear is that the province and the timber industry have a larger interest in cutting the big trees, and that will result in what Rachel mentioned of actually drying out a lot of these sites, which is the inverse of what we want to achieve.
The evidence suggests that thinning in these stands in certain areas is most effective when you do underburning. So it's really important that there's a full treatment and that there's a commitment to repeat the treatments every decade or so as necessary. And just in the bigger picture, most of the things that you want to do for fuel management on the landscape are not going to be hugely economically profitable in any way for the timber industry. So putting out fire management as a potentially beneficial to the forest industry is a little bit fraught.
Thank you. So the minister also mentioned partial harvesting. Could one of you explain what partial harvesting is and what are the positives and negatives for the ecosystem as well as in regards to fire? Is there a volunteer? We did talk about this as a big question.
Well, the partial harvesting means a wide range of things, and that's what opens the door for the timber industry and the government to sanction a lot more cutting than is necessary. It's in a way, it's a move by the government to get access to socially inaccessible timber around communities and watersheds and places like that. And a key part about ecologically responsible partial cutting is that you need to leave the big trees well spaced. And in the approach that I have used through the years, those trees should become full cycle trees. They should live out their lifetimes, die, fall on the ground, and enrich soil, store and filter water, while the next generation of trees follows them. But that form of partial cutting, I don't think is one that the minister and the timber industry are very interested in.
Thanks,
We won't have any industry at that rate.
Well, you'd have an industry, but it would look a lot different than it does now.
It's an interesting thing that, I've heard the minister recently say that we don't clear cut in the province anymore, which is just clearly misinformed. It's clearly not true. We 93% clear cut. The province's own little dashboard that they have that looks at this. That is what we primarily do in the province. And we do that because it's the cheapest way to get wood out. And so we, in the timber harvest, there's the 7% where we're doing good partial harvesting over here. And there's examples of that as a regular matter, of course. And if we did that, then we wouldn't be in quite the same situation that we are. If we had been doing that all this time, we wouldn't be in the same situation that we're in today. So I think part of the thing that makes this conversation tricky is that you're never quite sure what piece of land people are talking about. If we moved to partial harvesting, which was one of the recommendations of the Old Growth Strategic Review, as a general course, we would have to harvest less, and we would maintain a whole bunch of values on the ground when we harvest. And we don't do that. We primarily clear cut with reserves. So we don't do that. What they're talking about here is applying some kind of thinning or partial harvesting to a different portion of the land base that is not otherwise accessible. If they were talking about whole scale changing how we manage the land of the 93% that we currently clear cut, then we would be having a different conversation right now, because that would be a way to potentially move to keeping more values, keeping more carbon, dealing with the carbon issue. I mean, I think we should talk separately about carbon and how that fits into this. But I think that part of the issue is it really just depends where and on what scale. And because we've clear cut and because we have gone out and removed barriers like the deciduous trees, we kill them as a matter of course in forest management in BC. Using herbicides, those things that are fire resistant parts of the landscape. Again, it all depends where, but we need a whole scale change if we actually want to improve how forest management interacts with fire risk.
Can I just add that?
Yes.
So to be very clear, partial harvesting will not help reduce fire hazard in many areas in BC. It's not the appropriate tool. Second of all, partial harvesting will not have big, large ecological benefits if we don't reduce the amount of timber we're harvesting across BC.
Is partial harvesting a good idea in second growth tree plantations?
Now you're talking about ecological restoration. That's what has to occur in those plantations. And if you design it right, you can kind of move succession of those stands from a plantation, which is an artificial structure from the standpoint of forest ecosystems, towards a more natural kind of composition and structure. But that has to be carefully planned and implemented. It's also something that the government needs to support. It's not something that timber companies are going to embrace because there's no financial return for them.
Yeah, so Grace, that question that you came up with, that the ministry has legislated changes to increase what they call fiber generating and forest stewardship, and that they're speeding up the harvest of fire damaged trees now, which they say will build a wildfire resilient land base. What are the thoughts on that?
It's really a problematic framing of a complex problem. And fundamentally, we have a forest management system that does not think about ecology. It doesn't reflect ecology. As I said, we have everything from dry fire maintained ecosystems through to coastal temperate rainforest in this province. We have systematically over harvested over the last 5 decades, and we have avoided putting in place the things that we know as ecologists and biologists and foresters that we need to do in order to keep systems functioning. So we haven't done that. And now I'm very concerned by the notion that we would speed up in order to solve a problem that has been caused fundamentally by over-harvesting in the cheapest possible way that didn't reflect ecology. And, the government did recently, in the last 5 years, commit to changing the paradigm of how we look at the forest and changing it from one that is timber-centric to one that is ecosystem-centric. They committed to that. And unfortunately, I think they have forgotten that they committed to that, because we are not seeing that on a day-to-day reality check of what is now being put forward to panic manage the fiber flow crisis that we have. That is a clear flow from the effects of the last 5 years of five decades of decision making. So it is concerning.
And at the same time, the industry is also doing its own PR and posting ads that suggest forestry is a solution and that forestry can reduce wildfire risk through active forest management. We're wondering, does the salvage harvesting of fire-damaged timber help to build a wildfire-resistant, resilient land base, or does it actually cause more harm than we might expect?
Salvage logging is a misnomer. If you salvage something, you're allegedly improving it. You're making things better. That's not at all what happens with the way, quote unquote, salvage logging is practiced in BC. You're actually decreasing biological diversity that's redeveloping in those stands. You're interfering with water relations, which depend upon maintaining dead trees to enrich the forest soil and store and filter water. And so you're interrupting the whole process of natural succession after a wildfire, for example, or for that matter, after an insect attack. So it's better to leave those areas alone. The other thing that happens when the salvage logging occurs is you have more roads. And so you're reducing the amount of soil that will maintain a forest as the forest redevelops. Salvage logging is a bad idea. It's a way for the industry to get access to cheap timber, and that's one of the reasons I think the government promotes it.
Yeah.
Thank
And the
you.
chief forester's policy on salvage says that that people who salvage should not be salvaging, no matter what kind of salvage. There's a chief forest policy direction, and it says do not cut green timber while you're salvaging. Avoid the green timber. But I've been in many, many, many situations, and we have Forest Practices Board reports that show the extent 40% of salvage of mountain pine beetle was green timber, which exacerbated this midterm timber supply problem that we have. You know, in principle, doing some salvage harvesting, assuming that we buy into the idea that, which I do, that forestry is a way to produce a product in a sustainable way. It's just the fact that we do not regulate and manage it sufficiently. That is the fundamental crux. And we don't use ecology as the basis for decisions. We use money as the basis for decisions.
To try and crystallize that, I think, we need just because an area burned doesn't mean it's open for salvage. You need to have some sort of overall conservation strategy that tells you where the important parts are to leave alone. And that remains true whether it burns or not. So salvage is not a ticket. There's not even like really, you can't even say there's like fuel management benefits for salvage harvesting. There's really just the timber benefit. And that's okay, as Rachel says, but don't use it as an excuse.
Right. Thank you. Recently, a new report was published on the effects of the 2021 heat dome, which killed hundreds of British Columbians, as well as many other kinds of creatures. According to that report, in the week after the 2021 heat dome, fires increased 400%. The report said a heat event like that one used to happen once in 1,000 years, but by the middle of this century, it will likely happen every 5 to 10 years. The following graph shows millions of hectares burned in BC per decade. And the last bar, we're only just past the midpoint for the 2020s, so that bar will continue to grow. In your experience, what are the most important ways to reduce wildfire risks?
Well, there's only one, and it's actually get our act together and deal with climate change. Like, we are hooped. It doesn't matter what we do. This is just a game. I mean, your opening remarks hit it bang on. Like, we are fishing about here. If we do not get climate change, I'm under control. We are doomed, hooped, burning, many other things. It's not a good scene.
So adaptation works. Adapting to climate change works within a certain range of climate heating, and then we're kind of hooped. So we have to deal with both problems at the same time, and that I think there is one bit of potentially good news in that graph is that it's not the 1900 or like 1930 to 2000 was a slightly cooler period just because of the way some internal climate cycles worked. So before the 1930s or around that time, there were probably a few more fires. The data, like, we don't have a good understanding of exactly what burned because that's a long time ago. But so maybe our increase isn't as high as we think, but yeah, the trend is clearly not good. And, we're looking at, potentially 4 times as many fires by mid-century. And that's a scary prospect.
Yeah, I would emphasize what both Rachel and Dave have said. And I would add to that we need to change our footprint on the landscape. We need to change how we do business there. The extensive clear-cut plantation landscape that we've created is the most flammable landscape. We need to make sure that we have a network of complex older stands that have different vertical structure, big trees, medium-sized trees, openings, canopy gaps. That's the kind of landscape that's much more resistant to fire. We're not going to beat the climate change if it continues the way it's going, but that's the best hedge we have against it. And instead, forestry continues to do the exact opposite of what it should do to mitigate the chance of wildfire.
Thank you. Prescribed fire or cultural burning is often mentioned as a way to reduce the severity of wildfires. How big of a role can it play in preventing wildfires? And do you support letting some fires burn away from communities in order to reduce fuels?
There's so many different things to say to that. So, I mean, cultural burning was historically in a lot of ecosystems, and the scale and scope of it differed by ecosystem and place because some forests just don't burn very easily. So even on the coast, there is evidence that there was relatively small scale cultural burning around right close to village sites, and larger in other areas. So that is definitely a piece of this conversation, and it worked in relation to the ecology that was happening in the place. And again, that's the thing that we don't do. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing now in things like the BC is Burning film, which is an industry lobby film that says we should get out there and log the forest, is an equating of cultural burning with some kind of industrial forestry, because nobody was bringing in a truck and trucking out the trees. And what I'm seeing is kind of a taking a grain of truth of how things worked and then expanding it and suggesting that it needs to be everywhere, and actually we can come with our machines and do this and it's all going to be great. And I'm really concerned by the kind of the misinformation piece of that conversation. So yes, there is very much a real thing there that needs to come back into play and conversation. And yes, prescribed burning is appropriate in some of our ecosystems and will help. And we need to think about that in relation to thinning. I 30 years ago was involved in restoration projects in places like the Trench, where you have naturally fire maintained ecosystems, and those systems are now highly degraded because we took out all the big trees. And now we don't have fire resistant trees anymore. And still, even though I've been involved in many different projects in those systems, the tendency is just to take out the big trees. It's really hard to get them to not do that because that's what we do. And that's where the money is. And so, anyway, I will stop there.
Thank you.
An important thing to remember about cultural burning is it did not occur across the landscape. It occurred in focal points where Indigenous people were trying to cultivate and maintain food and medicine plants, maintain certain kinds of habitat types. People didn't build roads up mountains to do cultural burning. That all occurred close to where people lived. And that same understanding should also apply to prescribed fire. If we're going to move from cultural burning to prescribed fire, it needs to have focal points around communities, around specific habitat types that are easily accessible. And because we have eliminated fire for so long from many parts of the landscape, there's also a process of restoration that has to happen before you light a match, because we need to adjust the structure of the stands so that when fire does happen, that it can accommodate it from an ecological and cultural standpoint.
I'm also wondering, our forests have never previously been subjected to so much heat and so much drought and low humidity as we have now. So can we still rely on prescribed or cultural burning in the same way people did in the past?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's got to be a place-based answer to that. all of these tools potentially apply in the right places. But as Herb said, we now have to think much more carefully about the ecology and what the setup is in terms of managing the actual implication of the action. I don't know. I do think the thing that we fail to do, we fail to do lots of good things, most of which we know about, but we don't do them anyway. One of the things we don't think about in relation to forest management, and it's not answering your question, is just simply thinking about carbon. So, the BC is Burning film, for example, talks a lot about the massive fire and the carbon influence, and they try and use fear, which I have a problem with, to scare people into taking on this tactic. But they ignore the fact that the major emitter of carbon, the major resource emitter of carbon in this province is forest management. Basic forest management emits more carbon than any other industry. It doubles when there's a bad fire year, but the province's own greenhouse gas inventory information shows that extremely clearly. And of course, that's because our forests are made of carbon. And when you log them and take them away, and we do it incredibly wastefully in this province, we put carbon in the atmosphere directly in massive amounts. And so what we don't think about in these situations is which forests should be retained from a carbon storage perspective, and how, like, feeding back into that thing that if we don't deal with climate change, we need to think like forests are the only effective carbon sequestration and storage unit that we have at a large scale. They're the only one. We're spending billions of dollars trying to come up with something over here to do this, but we have it, and it's forests. And you could look this up online and see how the amount of carbon dioxide in the air goes down in spring in the northern hemisphere and goes back up in winter. It's astonishing. Like, look up that on YouTube. It blows your mind. This is the forest dealing with the climates. It's part of the carbon cycle. It's really, really cool. We don't think about that one jot when we do anything to the forest. So this is the kind of culture shift that we need in order to be good humans on the planet and actually make sensible science-based decisions that have a broader thing that fits into prescribed fires. It fits into burning salvage piles. It fits into every decision making every decision that we make. We need to be thinking through this lens.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's important.
Yeah, just to have a bit of a visual of that, like the amount of lumber you pull off a hectare is probably in many cases less carbon than the amount that gets burned in slash piles.
Mm-hmm.
So, and oftentimes there are these stands that the industry doesn't really want to log because they have a lot of rotten big hemlock in them that not very you get the tree falls, it breaks, you don't get a lot of lumber out of it. It's a lot of work per unit of wood, and fabulous habitat. And the government is trying to subsidize and push the logging of these stands to meet the 50-year created shortage of timber supply.
And let's add one more thing to this puzzle that scientists call irrecoverable carbon. And that's the carbon that's lost when we clear cut a forest and take those logs to a mill, saw them up, make them into products. And it will take far longer than predictions for the worst phase of climate change for those trees to regrow and store enough carbon to make a difference. So we need to look at that and realize that if we continue logging at the pace and in the way that we do, we're just making the system worse. That carbon is not going to be recovered in enough time to make a difference when it comes to the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis.
This is just an image, if you can see that, of slash piles on northern Vancouver Island from an ancient forest that was logged recently. And this is what we do with ancient forests in the province, just to make a point of, there is this argument that we take that forestry is good for carbon because it puts it into hardwood products, solid wood products. But it is such a myth and such a ridiculous statement when this is what we do here, and these piles will be burned. And that ties into that whole thing. It ties into how we don't care about old growth, how we don't care about carbon, how we don't make good decisions. So just to demonstrate, just that Dave was not exaggerating.
Yeah. And
maybe we should jump ahead to like, what gives you hope? Do you see any good happening for forests in our future? What can the audience do? There's people, in our chat saying, or in our Q&A saying, they really appreciate your collective work, and you've been a beacon of hope and inspiration for some of these people, and that, the choir gets this, but people really want to know, how do we shock decision makers into accountability? It's not a knowledge gap problem, it's willful ignorance. And the request is, can we all get in their faces, please? And I mean, I think that's the point of these types of webinars, and why Grace has, come up with all these amazing questions, and you being here. So what do you say? What gives you hope?
If there was a very powerful environmental lobby or climate lobby that could attract government's attention, and using some smart tools like maybe affecting markets for products, then I could see gaining government's attention to bring this back to the priority level it deserves. That's one thought.
Yeah.
I think that community-based projects that are also ecologically based is probably one of the best ways to do it. That we have some examples of Indigenous nations and other rural communities around BC that are doing that, and those need more promotion. They need more support by the public to say this shouldn't happen just in small areas with small communities or groups of people, but it should be the approach that we use across the landscape. But it's important to remember that not all community forests are created alike. Unfortunately, a lot of them are just small-scale examples of industrial forestry. And the Indigenous nations have been lured into conventional forestry by government and industry programs, not because they necessarily want to do it, but because they're both economically and socially desperate for something to improve their lot. So we need to find those small examples, which there are some scattered around, and promote them.
Yeah. I will say that I get my hope by watching chickadees, because they're the best source of hope. And since the Old Growth Strategic Review is released, I have lived through cycles of hope and grave disappointment, because there's nothing worse than being given hope and then having it smashed into small pieces by them not being picked up. So that is a problem. At the same time, I do see a change. I see a change in the people, in a lot of the people who are engaged in this within the province. There always have been and remain a lot of people who are on side, and I know people are tired of us saying, just tell the government that you care, but it really does. It may not make a difference, but it really does matter that you tell them, because that's what the industry lobby is doing full on. I was there at the Kofi conference when they had a media person stand up and say, you can sell yourself as the saviors. And that is what BC Burning did. And they are very effective. And I have, we know that that's a very active plan. And, we need organization, and we need clear messaging that people aren't fooled, and that we do not want to go the way of the South, of the country south of us, where if you don't like some piece of science, you pretend it doesn't exist. I am seeing that, and it frightens me in key places. And but there's a lot of people who disagree, so who are on side to do the right thing using science and using ecology. So we have to encourage them to keep doing their job, be nuanced. It doesn't matter who people work for, they can be on side or not, and really understand that. So, keep pushing though, because all your voices are incredibly important. And people say, Rachel, way to go, keep saying, but we need the 10,000, right? It's everybody. We need that. So I just encourage people to not give up and think it's hopeless, and keep going at all scales.
Do you think we can lobby for a citizens' assembly on forestry? That's a question that's come in.
Personally, we know what to do. We just don't do it. So we don't need any more panels, any more reports, any more science. We just need to do the things that we have known for 30 years that we need to do. And government knows what they are. They have endless reports that tell them what they are. They bury them. They wrote an old growth action plan. They then bury the reports that are within it. We need to shine a big spotlight on this and just keep pushing for accountability within our decision-making bureaucracies, and keep going. There's probably people on this call who used to work for government who are retired. Strong call to action amongst the people who know how bureaucracy is supposed to work, and actually start to really push.
Mm-hmm.
It's gloves off time, people. It really is. Go. I am inciting riot. Come on. I'm inciting riot. Give me the thumbs up.
I love it.
Everybody. Let's go.
You're
Keep
my
in
hero.
mind
To
that
lose.
government studies and government initiatives like the ecosystem health and biodiversity framework, those are ways of avoiding change. The government uses them to raise everybody's expectations, and then people argue about that, push back on that all the time. Meanwhile, the same old thing continues to happen, and so we need to look at ways that people can see what needs to happen. I remember, I think back many years ago, Merv Wilkinson, when he was still with us, he created pandemonium with the timber industry and government because he showed them when the timber industry said you can't partial cut in old growth Douglas fir on the coast. He took them for a walk through his forest and said, look, this is where it's happening. And we need more of that kind of thing going on across the province in the various different ecosystem types that we've all described as that wide diversity in BC.
Mm-hmm. We have Kathy Code, who has been with Wildwood, and she asks, with so much of the province covered in tree plantations, is there any point in fire management?
If the goal is protecting communities, there can be focused management around fire smarting that will be very effective. So fire smarting the housing, and particularly along the edge of communities. And there are strategic places to put fuel breaks that consider the topography and prevailing winds that can protect communities. So there are things we can do in the forest in strategic locations, but the idea that you go through the forest and randomly, or go into a park and pull out trees to prevent fire from going through the park. First of all, fire's not a problem for a natural ecosystem in many areas.
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, it's just a timber grab. It's not protecting any infrastructure. So I think despite the fact that we have a lot of plantations, I don't see that as being there are a lot of fire adaptation opportunities, so we shouldn't give up hope there.
Great. Yeah, we'll be getting more into that in the second half here. And
the plantation landscape that we have is a great ecological restoration resource. that can employ many people. And that the government, if the government's interested in employment that deals with rural communities based in forests that have lost employment because of overcutting by timber companies, they should support and fund the ecological restoration of that landscape. And if they were creative, they would increase the stumpage for timber companies and use that as a subsidy to fund ecological restoration of those stands, because it's timber companies and poor advice by professional foresters that have resulted in that situation.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was just in an example of a stand. I know there was a bit of, I was just on the coast, a little bit of old growth, and then a very, very dense second growth. So this myth that forests grow back is ridiculous. Of course, trees grow back and we planted them way too densely. And so we get something that will never turn into the old growth forest that it started off. But 20 years ago, the Redfish Restoration Society, I think it was maybe 16 years ago, had gone in and selectively, carefully thinned that stand from below. Like that means taking the little trees out. And it was so you had in your view old growth here, second growth unthinned here, completely dense, no understory, nothing, completely dark, no birds, no life, no understory. And then over here where they had done this careful restoration of the kind that Herb is talking about, it was I mean, I say the kind of thing that Herb says all the time, but it was actually shocking to me how different it was, how much regrowth there had been, how much diversity there was in the undergrowth. So it is a real thing. And I'll bet that the carbon stores in that stand would double because you've brought the understory back and you're creating resilience and biodiversity, and you're keeping moisture in the ground. In that case, then it was way moister in that restored area. And that's just after 16 years of someone going in by hand and doing careful work. And so we could be doing that across restoration area, riparian areas across the province. It would be incredibly valuable and other places.
Have a look at the Galliano Conservancy's website. They've done some really amazing ecological restoration over the last 25 or 30 years. And I've had the privilege to work with them, and they follow the path that we're talking about here. It's important to see those kinds of examples, because for one thing, that's a coastal forest where a lot of people, professionals alike, will say you can't do that. But there's good examples there where ecological restoration works, and that's protection of natural forests or primary forests coupled with ecological restoration are the future of forestry. If we don't do those two things, we'll eventually turn out the lights.
Mm-hmm. Grace, is there anything you'd like to ask at this point?
Yes, it was just one thing. Minister Parmar said that BC is a leader in sustainable forestry. I think that you've been laying that to rest. Is there a leader in sustainable forestry?
That's a tough question to put everyone
It's a tough.
with.
It is a tough question. Like humans aren't good at this, right? This is not what we do. We fall for the short term, the money based. We in this part of our society, we are not good at putting values first. I think the thing that's different about British Columbia is people don't realize how valuable, how rare what we have here is at a global scale. If you take the North American continent and look at the historic distribution of large mammals, for example, and it is shrunk. The natural distribution of forests and systems are shrunk back into this northern western corner of North America. So we have values here and in Alaska and to the north, but that don't exist anywhere else. And so we actually have, it's the responsibility part. We have this biodiversity and this amazing thing here simply because there hasn't been enough time for it to disappear yet. But we're on the same track. as everywhere else in North America and everywhere else in Europe. You know, I come from a place where they chopped down the last trees 400 years ago, and now they're spending billions of dollars trying to put them back, like put ecosystems back and rewild in Europe. And yet here we have this globally rare thing that people basically don't recognize. And they think it's just going to keep going. But I had mountain caribou in my backyard here when I first moved into this house, and now I don't, because they've become extirpated. We are extirpating populations of large mammals in this province because we have an appalling approach to managing it. We haven't recognized that we need to get on the right side of history on this particular issue and take the biodiversity and climate crisis seriously. And so I can't point out any other subgroup of humans who are doing better, but we're really not doing a good job here.
Bhutan, I believe, has protected more than half of their forested land base. And that is, we still have huge opportunities to protect that primary forest in BC. Globally, there's an initiative to protect 30%. The federal government in Canada has signed on, and it doesn't look like the province is treating that goal seriously yet. And that's a huge opportunity that we have that we should take. If the public demands it, maybe it'll happen.
Are there resources that people can use to reach councillors, MLAs, and regional district directors to stop logging?
Yeah, I think people should be aware of the Biodiversity Convention initiative to protect 30% of the world's land base and oceans. And I think we can at least get a link to that.
Right.
I support what Dave's saying about the conventions. There's a lot of good material there. But let's not forget that in terms of sustainable forestry, the rules, unfortunately, around the world, in my experience, are set by industry, not by ecologists, not even by government, because they're lobbied by timber interests. So we need to look outside of that. We need to and remember sustainability. What do you want to sustain? Where? How? That's another one of those questions that can easily be manipulated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Megan mentions the new Forest Act proposal. She said it puts
Yeah.
local communities in the forefront of planning for truly sustainable forestry. So I guess that's one of those resources that maybe you're speaking to.
I think that's a really good resource. There's a lot of work that led by Jennifer Houghton that has gone into development of the new Forest Act, and she's working directly to try to get the attention of government, and I think she would be helped by communities everywhere getting behind that movement.
There was a request for us to bring her on for one of our webinars. Yeah.
There is definitely a need to speak into the broader. I mean, we half of Europe is coming here in a month from now to watch soccer, and we will see beautiful British Columbia ads going everywhere, and the ideas of bears and whales and wolves, and there needs to be better information out there and education around what the actual state of the province actually is, and there are people working on trying to demonstrate this. I mean, we just need education about what shades of green mean, because people fly across British Columbia and they may or may not see the state of the land base. But if you're an ecologist, you cannot fly across the province without understanding that something is really seriously wrong. I recently did have a meeting with the premier, and I had just come back from Costa Rica, and after that I'd driven to Bamfield, and comparing what we have done to our coastal temperate rainforest, as well as all the other types of rainforest that we have, but these globally rare forests. And in Costa Rica, they made an active decision in the 80s that they were going to really maintain their forest ecosystems, and they also have really actively set aside a really big swath of the landscape and promoted themselves as a destination for tourism in a real way. And we really have a choice in BC. Are we going to just go the way of the rest of North America and wipe these things out, or are we going to actively, really genuinely try to keep them? And I think the decision makers really need to know that it matters internally to the people here and externally. We need market pressure from elsewhere. We are now trying to sell our wood in Europe, and they have no idea what we do here. So I think that's a key thing.
We've got a question from Michaela saying, what advice would you give a forestry student working in industry under the First Nation Forestry Council? She said she strongly believes forestry should be grounded in ecology, but how can I continue to stay grounded in ecological knowledge while working in an industry that is often driven by economic priorities? Any advice?
Keep going. Keep standing by your principles. That's all you can do.
And I think I would just add to that, if you can keep yourself in a position that you're never afraid to quit, that's about the only way you can survive in an environment where you're actually probably going to have to change things.
I think also I would advise her to speak out, make the what she's observing public. Because there's a strength in that. If she has the public behind her, there's unlikely to be serious retribution by timber companies that she works for. And the more people that do that, the better. Because we not only need to change what the timber companies are doing, we need to change what the word forestry means. And that rests at the foot, in my opinion, of the Association of BC Forest Professionals. They need to be less captivated by industry and more accountable to the public.
Martha asks, what about working together towards rights of nature, which is happening in many places, even in California?
It's a good, I was going to say in your examples, I think Ecuador has has some kind of thing in their constitution that links to the rights of forest. I think there is definitely people conceptually for and against it, in the sense that our colonial justice system hasn't dealt well with values, but and so I know there's people who don't like the idea, but it's simply about valuing something else other than money, which is the only thing our current economic system, our current capitalist system just values money. And it doesn't value all the other things. We know basic 101, we externalize all the costs. We ignore all of the other values. And that's why we have climate change and water concerns globally. The rights of nature is very interesting and growing. There is a fellow, can someone come up with his name? Dave, who has written a paper on the rights of ancient forests and is interested in that. Chris Rusnak is a lawyer. You could look him up, and it's a very interesting thing. This is slowly happening, getting traction worldwide, mostly around rights of rivers. But I know that people are actively working on the rights of forests, and that's right.
Look up David Boyd. David Boyd has written a book on rights of nature and researched it around the world. He was also a special rapporteur on the environment for the UN too. So it's a really interesting read, the book. It's all about what we value, really, when it comes down to the simple truth of it.
And I also want to let you know that David Quigg of the Sierra Club has posted a link, which we'll also include with the replay. It's a template that can be used as Forestry as a Solution campaign. So we'll get that out to everybody. But if anyone on this call wants to look right now, it is in the Q&A section, that link. So yes.
Can I say that the government ignores? I heard recently that they basically have an internal policy that basically ignores the letters that you send through websites. So just take the premier.gov.bc.ca, put it in your email, premier.gov.bc.ca. Put it in an email and say, you care about this. Whatever the issue is, whoever it is, like, do it directly. It's way more effective. And sure, also sign on to petitions, protectbcforest.ca. Sign on to petitions. There's Save What's Left. They have a petition that is around some of these issues. It is worth signing on to petitions, and it's worth clicking the thing. But if you can take the extra 2 minutes to actually send a direct email, it's much more effective.
Or make a phone call. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
or
make
a phone call.
They don't answer. He doesn't answer. Mr. David Eby doesn't answer the phone, so you're safe.
Surprise.
Yes. So we should really move on to part 2 here.
Yeah. Moving on. Okay, thank you very much to all our panelists. This has been fabulous. We're going to carry on towards the FireSmart portion now. And just a little background again, 358 buildings burned in the resort town of Jasper in 2024, and 25,000 people had to be evacuated for more than 3 weeks. The fire was not extinguished until the following year, a whole year. And more than 300 buildings also burned in Kelowna in 2024, and more than 35,000 people were evacuated. More than 15,000 hectares burned in 3 separate places, and ignited embers carried over 2.5 kilometers by the wind started fires elsewhere. One of the first things the FireSmart website mentions is that trees are flammable. It says coniferous trees with cones and needles are highly flammable and should be not be within 10 meters of your home. And that includes spruce, fir, pine, and cedar. If these trees ignite within 10 meters of your home, the direct flames and intense heat can cause damage or even ignite your home, according to their quote on their website. Todd Carnahan is a biologist with a background in conservation, who is currently working for Emergency Cowichan in making FireSmart recommendations for homeowners in that region. Welcome, Todd.
Well, thank you very much, Frances.
It seems that FireSmart often mentions trees as a fire problem first, but there is a long list of other combustible things we might have close to our homes. Yet trees seem to be unfairly cited and targeted as the primary culprit. So how necessary is it to remove trees within 10 meters of one's home? And what are the alternatives if people want to protect and preserve their trees?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the platform. I represent Emergency Management Cowichan, not FireSmart BC. We deliver their program through our regional government to help homeowners to protect their properties. And I want to thank our fellow panelists, some real giants in the industry that I really respect, and I appreciate them sharing their truth with power today. We have many trees in our regions that we really value. I have a 5-acre woodlot. I have managed that through my ecological restoration training for over a decade now, and I've met with hundreds of homeowners in my region who are concerned about the changes they see due to climate, due to land use, and are really concerned about what they can do with their own properties. I would say that because we place a great amount of emotional value in trees, that we're often triggered when we hear that perhaps trees are a threat to our homes. And what I'd like to share with our audience is that trees come in all different flavors, and we're mostly concerned about conifers because they are highly flammable compared to other trees like deciduous trees and broadleaf evergreens. And when we're talking about our homes also, many people think of trees in terms of the small hedges and shrubs that we have around our homes. The larger trees that we have, especially on the coastal environment here, they're not really a risk to our homes if they're properly mitigated, like a Douglas fir with its branches lifted up. The bark of those trees is not the problem. It's the needles, cones, and very thin twigs that are the flammable part of our environment that can burn very rapidly within a couple of minutes. and then basically all that energy is lost. So if the home is not ignited during that brief moment of flammability, then the home is safe. But what FireSmart really focuses is on the home itself, because if the home does not ignite, it doesn't burn. It sounds simple, but on the coast here, we actually value having a tree canopy. We have different standards than they have in the interior, where it's much hotter, much drier. And so on the coast, we focus on maintaining canopy, maintaining a healthy native ground covers, and focusing on the distances of those plants from the home. So the critical part is right beside the home. This is typically where people put their firewood and their stored materials, their furniture. It's much more important to focus on that zone and the home itself than to focus on the trees around the home.
Todd, would that be true also like in the Okanagan? You mentioned to me before that I think the Okanagan is one of the like fire is more likely in the Okanagan because of the dryness of the region. Is that right?
Yeah, so I have a family in the interior, and it's a totally different country out there. So the recommendations that I will make to a homeowner are going to be different than the ones for folks in the interior, not only because of the different climate and topographies and types of forest ecosystems, but also like the amount of fuels is different. Down on the coast here, we worry more about uh, the home itself as opposed to the landscape. But in the interior, where FireSmart was really born, um, you look at the standards for FireSmart as minimums as opposed to standard recommendations, I think, because they have more extreme fire behavior out there. And incidentally, our fire behavior is changing here on the coast as well, but it is still a lot less of aggressive than we see in the interior.
Wonderful. Thank you. So trees, as we almost all know, provide innumerable benefits, such as shade. They buffer the wind, assist with stormwater management, help moderate the climate, absorb carbon, and clear pollutants from the air, provide habitat for pollinators, birds, and other forms of life. And they're beautiful to look at and add immeasurable value to properties. So in hurricane zones where trees have been lost, some people haven't even thought about this until you live in that region, that electric bills go up substantially, sometimes as much as $400 more a month, as residents are trying to rely on air conditioning to remain cool. And this cooling is just so important that the lack of trees was mentioned as one of the reasons why so many people died during the 2021 heat dome. Grace, I'll let you take it over from here.
Thanks, Frances. A quote from the report explicitly says, urban tree canopy reduces surface temperatures by as much as 12 degrees Celsius. The urban heat island effect increases heat-related mortality and morbidity. And I'll just add that heat-related illnesses and deaths have greatly increased in recent years, and that wildfire smoke can also cause premature deaths, especially for those with lung or heart issues. And trees capture particles on their trunks and on their leaves that actually filter some of those dangerous particles out of the air. So, Todd, we're wondering, can we prioritize both nature and FireSmart?
Absolutely, Grace. Coming from a background of conservation biology in this ecoregion for 35 years, I discovered there's a great amount of overlap between the FireSmart recommendations and actual forest stewardship recommendations that I used to make to thousands of homeowners in Victoria region. Looking at trees as features of our properties. In the 30-foot zone around homes, there are plenty of different types of plants that are excellent for shading, for screening, for pollinators and other wildlife. We really like to focus on the deciduous trees, especially natives like the arbutus, the maples, the alders, cottonwoods. All of these trees are very low flammability, and they can actually provide a radiant buffer say if there was fire on the other side of them, they can actually provide a buffer against radiation for several minutes, which can actually reduce the effect of wildfire adjacent to homes. So what we do recommend, though, is herbaceous species around the home, specifically in that 5 foot or 1.5 meter zone around the house and any structures around it, like garages and decks. And in that way, you could still provide really nice habitat. You're just making an informed decision, which includes the filter of FireSmart choices when you're talking about the right plant for the right spot.
I also wanted to make the point that we rarely think about our vehicles as being flammable, but the average gas-fueled vehicle contains 150 to 200 or more kilograms of plastic, and plastic is a petroleum product. In California, in July 2015, strong winds drove this wildfire to actually jump onto cars on the highway, which is pretty horrific. This photo was taken after the LA wildfire in January last year. It shows a burnt car right beside an intact tree and telephone pole. The post went viral. It was suggesting that a wildfire would not have behaved this way, that the fire must have had a different cause. One reporter asked experts about it, and these are some of their comments. A land surface modeler said, wildfires can behave unpredictably. Cars and buildings have large, flat surfaces that can catch burning embers. And once it catches fire, the car's enclosed interior traps heat, much like an oven, making the flames much hotter. The plastics, foams, and fabrics inside can fuel an intense fire that quickly consumes the vehicle. A fire protection engineer told the reporter that fires in urban areas are mostly spread by man-made fuels like houses, cars, and fences, and that embers generated by these fuels can enter cars through windows from the bottom of the vehicle, or they can accumulate along the tires. Another expert said closed structures like a building or a car will cause a buildup of hot gases and heat, making the fire more intense and resulting in greater damage. So, Todd, it seems to me that FireSmart doesn't make that big of a deal about vehicles being dangerous as far as fire. Do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, make an interesting point, Grace, that vehicles are considered fuel, just like a cedar hedge adjacent to your home is fuel. Anything that can burn is fuel adjacent to your home, and cars are definitely in that category. Just how you mentioned that cars are they can be lit up by ember storms. I'd like our audience to remember just one thing. If they take one thing away from this webinar, is that ember storms, such as we saw in California last spring, that caused multiple ignitions all over the city, that's when a wildfire becomes an urban conflagration. It's at a catastrophe point at that stage where no amount of structural firefighting or wildfire fighting can stop it when it is now structure to structure fires. And that's what FireSmart is all about, is preventing that progression to an urban conflagration. So we do recommend that people park their cars at least 30 feet away from their home for that reason. And that just like you're protecting your car from embers, you're rolling up the windows, you're putting it inside a garage if you need to abandon it when you're evacuating. We look at our homes like uh, a protective sheath around our home itself. We want to find anywhere where embers can lodge or go right inside the house. So windows and vents are one of the most vulnerable parts of a home, because embers can blow right into the home and ignite it from the inside. So you could have a metal roof, you could have hardy plank siding, you could have a non-combustible deck, but if your vents allow embers into the home, or your windows are open when you're away and the ember storm comes, your home has no protection. So FireSmart is not just about home construction and landscaping, it's also about the maintenance of your property, so that you have less work to do if you need to evacuate, or the first responders have less work to do to make your home defensible as that ember storm approaches.
In my research, I saw many photos of whole areas of burned homes, and yet there would be some intact trees, even conifers still standing. Even after the Fort McMurray fire, which was so big that it created its own clouds, wind, and lightning. And here's a shot of Jasper after the fire there. You can see a few coniferous trees on the left-hand side, although many did burn. And the fire didn't burn through the trees in the middle, although we don't know why. It could be that the wind changed. But anyone that's had a fireplace knows that you don't want to buy green wood because it doesn't burn that well. I'm also wondering, how are municipalities that have tree protection bylaws, which are meant to retain trees, responding to requests for permits to remove mature conifers due to FireSmart's suggestions? Do you know anything about that, Todd?
Well, I don't work for the municipalities where those permits would be requested. Trees themselves are really not the hazard that we might think they are. A conifer, in those photos specifically of Jasper, um, it was embers that came from far away that lit places around the homes. And Jasper was fairly well fire smarted because it's a tourist town with federal money, and they had planned ahead. And maybe that's why the entire town didn't burn and only a third of it did. But there are ways that local municipalities and regional districts are making the development application permit process more stringent when it comes to wildfire prone areas like my own home. And there are building codes that are gradually being improved so that the materials that are used in homes are much more resilient to wildfire. And that's a gradual process. I still look at homes that are over 100 years old, and I can see that changes have happened even in the last decade that create more defensible neighborhoods. Unfortunately, what we see in the landscaping component of it is that in a fire smart neighborhood is getting established and people are moving in, the first thing they do is buy a bunch of cedar hedges or cypress hedges and put the cypress in between the homes. That gives them some screening and privacy, but it's putting both homes at risk because you got an ignition point right between them, and windows can get cracked or vents melted out very easily when you have that type of fuel immediately adjacent to a home. But things are changing, and I think that we will see standards for landscaping in the future.
Are there financial incentives that would encourage more homeowners to take FireSmart actions?
Absolutely. There are thousands of dollars in rebates available in my own region, in the Cowichan Valley Regional District. I know the Alberni-Clackwood also has rebates. Uh, Individuals need to look at their own jurisdictions to find what FireSmart programs are available and if there are rebates for homeowners to pursue our recommendations for their homes and their properties. So for us, it's a 50-50 cost share. Say the homeowner wants to remove an old shed that's attached to the side of the house that they no longer want, we would help to pay them to remove that. Say they want to remove a hedge or they want to upgrade their siding or windows. If we recommend it, then that 50-50 cost share is available to the homeowner.
And should urban parks and regional parks be fire smarted? And if so, what effect does it have on the park's ecology?
We have done some of this work. It's very limited because it's very expensive to do. For example, we did some parks. One park, Holland Creek Park, in the town of Ladysmith, and you're looking at upwards of $14,000 per hectare to treat parkland. And of course, we have registered professional foresters doing the prescriptions for those parks. They're very light touches because they also have recreational and ecological values. So it's manual work. It's a hand bombing material out of the forest. It's not removing everything. There's a certain threshold at which you want to leave downed woody debris. And again, it's focusing on the very young saplings, typical of second growth, where forestry or farming has been abandoned in the past. And so you've got a park with a ravine in it, and there are typically way too many trees in there. Because those typical disturbances of fire have been removed. Meanwhile, we've got many ongoing disturbances with pets and weeds and just the amount of people using those places. Uh, they are they're fire prone because of all the ignition possibilities from smoking and just people camping in our natural areas. So it's a complex question, but we really want to focus work on parks where they're adjacent to homes. So the homeowners can see the effects and they also realize that they're part of the solution as well as focusing on their own property when the park itself may not have any funds to do that fire smart work.
Do we have any questions?
Yeah, some of the things that came in, someone wanted to know if bark mulch, if it's irrigated daily during the very dry, hot season, and it's included in landscaping near your home, is it a fire hazard?
Yes, bark mulch can be a hazard. You mentioned earlier, Grace, that Fort McMurray burned. Um, there were literally 160-foot flames on one side of the road, and the homes on the other side of the road burned not because of those flames, but because of embers falling into these bark mulch patches underneath little mini conifers. And those ignition points created fire pathways to the homes, and then that's what caused the urban conflagration there. It was not the flames, it was the ember storm bringing ignition into the neighborhoods in multiple locations. So bark mulch, not a bad idea to have it as long as it's 30 feet from the home. And there's other options of mulches that are non-combustible, like rock and gravel uh, and just using a highly amended soil as a mulch immediately adjacent to your home can feed your plants, but it's not going to increase the fire risk.
Can I just add that due to the increasing drought, some communities fear that they won't have enough water to fight wildfires if they occurred. Like this Sunshine Coast declared a state of emergency in the summer of 2022 due to the ongoing drought, and they were worried about having enough water to fight fires. So I'm just kind of also responding to that person's question about watering the mulch every day. Some people wouldn't have that option, right?
Mm. Well, and it's like someone asked about a WASP. I don't know what that is, sprinkler systems. I mean, we're using water to wash our cars and forgetting that we're going to need it potentially for all these other things.
Yeah.
Todd, so what is the value of sprinkler systems? I think it's
Yes, many people see sprinkler systems as a silver bullet that's going to solve all their problems, but they're mechanical systems that can fail. They require people to manage them, and they can also have negative impacts on the ability to fight a fire. You can damage your house by leaving a sprinkler on and taking off, and it just wets the house down for several days. You're not covered by insurance if you damage your own home.
mm,
You can also use up your water supply. Like I live on a well, and if I let my water run and then take off, my well will run out of water. So I will not. The water would not be available to the wildfire fighters when they need it. And they typically don't use a lot of water as wildfire fighters. Currently, we're developing structure protection units, which are trailers full of pumps, hoses, and tanks that would be deployed into neighborhoods that were subject to ember storms. Um, but we do recommend that people get sprinkler systems and simply leave them at the door of their house so that the first responders can choose to use them or not when they're rapidly deploying some protection for neighborhoods. So it's much more important for homeowners to focus on the construction of their homes and the maintenance of their homes than to simply get a set of sprinklers and walk away from the idea of fire smarting.
someone wanted to know thank you, that rather than using gravel, which absorbs heat, wouldn't a green ground cover be better? I mean, you're assuming it's not going to brown up.
If you're in a sunny situation, then yes, you probably want to avoid a rocky gravel if you've got plants under it. Definitely good in shady situations. But the idea of foundation plantings of woody shrubs is now an obsolete concept for home improvement. We really need to switch away from woody plants and focus more on the vegetative growth. Um, there are many native plant options for that, including a guide that I made that's available through Habitat Acquisition Trust, top 50 native plants for your garden. All of them are FireSmart, focusing on avoiding woody plants in that first 1.5 meters. But grass, well-cut grass is right up to the side of the home is a suitable treatment for fire smarting in our region.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I want to thank you all for your time today. And there was so much more we could have talked about. We've said from the beginning we could have done 2 of these. So please, everybody know that we're going to include so much additional information with the replay link, and that'll be available on creativelyunited.org, where you can also find all kinds of resources and information about upcoming events, community stories, videos, and even a nonprofit directory. And I'd just like to quickly give thanks and a special mention to our climate community partner, Jonathan O'Riordan of the Gail O'Riordan Climate in the Arts Legacy Series, and visit creativelyunited.org to learn more. Thank you for attending. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, and may every day be Earth Day.